So a while back, I was scrolling through HBO Max, which is currently the best streaming service, by the way, and I came across Little Children. I read the synopsis and then thought about my cousin talking to me about it years ago. I didn't remember much of what he said about it, aside from recommending it, so I clicked play. Little Children is a drama about four strangers in a modern-day suburban town and how their lives become intertwined. Sarah and Brad are each disenchanted with their own marriages and sort of slip into an affair. Brad also befriends local disgraced police officer Larry, and as they get to know each other, we discover that Larry is fixated on harassing Ronnie, a recently registered sex offender. Now on paper, this sounds like a great story, which it is. However, like most great stories, they only become so because they were well executed. This is where Todd Field comes in. Field is an actor turned writer and director. You may recognize him from his small supporting roles in films like Twister and Eyes Wide Shut. He's thus far only directed 2 films, In the Bedroom and Little Children, both films that I discovered in the past year. And the unfortunate part about this is that they were released subsequently in 2001 and 2006. So here I am, 14 years down the road, wondering why in the hell he hasn't made anything since. So in the meantime, let's take a look at what he's done already. One of my favorite things about Field is his obsession with intertwining characters. Now, both of his films are adaptations of books. I haven't read either of these books, so I can't say how they compare. I assume that these characters in both of these books intertwine just as much as they do in the films. But even so, I think it's worth pointing out just how difficult adapting something into a screenplay is. You have to either capture the spirit of said story, or capture the same story in the exact same or similar enough style in order for it to work. And that is no easy feat. In Little Children, his script juggles the many relationships around with magnificent pace, and he plants little hooks throughout the film by means of expert filmmaking. For instance, the film opens with the sound of clocks. Then our eyes are treated to a mini montage of little clocks and figurines of children laid throughout an elegant home. Amidst the sound of the mini clocks, we hear a televised newscast. We see that someone is watching the news in the living room, but we can't tell who it is. We find out through the news that there is a sexual predator in the neighborhood, and the reporter is alerting the neighborhood to keep an eye out for him. This opening scene has already thrust the audience into the narrative while simultaneously immersing them in the dark tone that floods the film. We then jump from that to the lives of Sarah and Brad. We quickly discover that the house in the opening scene with all of those clocks isn't either of their homes. It's only later in the second act that we discover that the house belongs to Ronnie and his mother. Now, I think it's worth noting how we aren't blatantly shown this information, like a simpler film would. Instead, much like that opening scene with the clocks, it's very subtle. We see Ronnie and his mother interacting in the house. We hear the clocks from the opening, but at first it's very quiet. It's very low in the sound mix. Then they are gradually brought up within the mix, until eventually we find ourselves in the crux of this scene, and they are now prominent in the sound mix. And amongst all of this, we are never once shown any of these clocks in any close-up shots. They are only ever small fragments within the background. The sound mixing has successfully clued you in as an audience member to what's going on. And when I came to this realization on my first watch, I couldn't help but crack a huge smile, because this is excellent filmmaking. Soon after, we're treated to another great moment when Sarah and Brad have sex for the first time. We get a gorgeous stagnant shot of them lying in bed afterwards. This shot lingers, and their eyes are the focus of the shot. And there is something odd happening. There is a noticeable gray glare that has been edited into their pupils, making them appear to be blind. Later on, Sarah is at a book club discussing a book about a lady who has multiple affairs. They discuss how this lady was blinded by the enchantment of her affairs and how they were destroying her life. Sarah turns a blind eye to these thematic similarities that we are picking up on and defends her and the character's actions to the book club. Diving into this thematic connection, we see that Sarah and Brad's affair is blinding the both of them from the good things in their lives. With Brad, it's his loving and supportive wife, and with Sarah, it's her perfect daughter that she takes for granted. Later on in the film, Brad's wife sees Sarah's toenails in a pivotal dinner scene, and they are painted the same color as her and Brad's eyes from that earlier shot. These connections are all fragments working together to help interweave the lives of these characters in a very subtle way. Field again is not okay with the conventions of most simple filmmakers. He continually goes the extra mile with thematic subtleties. These connections all gradually slide deeper and deeper into each of the characters' lives in ways just as smooth as the filmmaking techniques on display. until by the end of the film, you find yourself shocked at just how crazy these characters' journeys have become, especially in relation to where they began only 2 hours prior. Moving on to Field's first film, In the Bedroom, you have Frank, a young man with a bright future ahead of him. He's dating Natalie, a divorced older woman with a younger son. Frank's parents, Matt and Ruth, are skeptical, yet supportive of this odd pairing. However, Natalie's violent ex, Richard, looms in the background, making all of the characters and us as the audience nervous. Field continues to use similar editing techniques to illustrate his character weaving. Here, he uses a well-placed parable at the beginning of the film, centered around lobster catching to foreshadow and set up character connections. Much like the clock scene in Little Children, this scene comes super early on in the film. The parable is presented in a monologue by Matt to Natalie's son on a fishing trip, and it happens so early on in the film that most people might dismiss it thematically. Attentive viewers, however, will catch on and be rewarded later when the chaos hits.
Oh boy. You see what happened to this poor fellow?
What?
Oh look, he lost an arm. See, the trap has nylon nets called heads. Two side heads to let the lobster crawl in. And inside, they call a bedroom head to hold the bait and keeps them from escaping. You know the old saying, two's company, three's a crowd? No, it's like that. You, get more than two of these in the bedroom, and chances are something like that's gonna happen.
It's such a joy to watch films like these, crafted by a methodical storyteller. Similar to my praise towards Christopher Nolan's early work in my last video, Field is a writer and director who is fixated on enchanting his audience with simple stories enhanced by his expert execution. Field and Nolan share a flair for themes that run deep within the human psyche. And while Nolan prefers complex story structures and world building, Field favors subtle filmmaking techniques to enrich his spellbinding stories. And some of them were hot topics at the time and remain so today, making them eerily relevant. Now, neither of these films are perfect. In the Bedroom has some issues with predictability in its third act, and Little Children has unnecessary narration throughout. However, these small flaws never eclipse the genius of its subtlety. As you may have noticed, I avoided major spoilers for both of these films, because if the box office for these films say anything, it's that they were both criminally underappreciated upon release, and so have sadly been forgotten by many. Both of these films are phenomenal, and neither one of them have been released on Blu-ray. You can't even purchase Little Children in high definition on digital formats. If you have any appreciation for film, and if you're here watching this video, I assume you do, I urge you to seek out Field's work if you haven't already. It's been far too long since this man has had a film greenlit, and that's a terrifying fate deemed to filmmakers whose work isn't seen by the masses, especially when they are this good at what they do.